From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Call on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thanks for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today I'm pleased to welcome my colleague, my very good friend, Patrick McHenry, to the program. Congressman McHenry represented Western North Carolina since 2004. He currently sits on the Budget and Financial Services Committees and also the Government Oversight Committee. I've asked Patrick to join me to discuss our growing national debt and runaway federal spending. Congressman, welcome to the show, but before we get into the substance of it, I remember when you showed up here, sort of a ball of fire, the youngest guy when you arrived to serve in Congress. You must still be in the top 5 youngest people in Congress.
For better or worse.
For better or worse.
I was happy some new folks got elected a little younger.
Yeah, a little younger.
Or that I've got a little more gray hair and aged a little bit. So.
And you won. It was quite an upset primary. You really did sort of beat the Republican establishment in your area, and really with a lot of energy. Tell them a little bit about your opening campaign in terms of how you won that thing.
Well, it's interesting. Everybody's talking this year about grassroots politics, and, well, that's how I got elected to Congress. I knocked on doors, made volunteer phone calls, and it was that type of interaction one-on-one with voters that actually made a huge difference. And also, once I got elected, gave me a better insight to what my district needs and what my people care about.
You beat a prominent local elected politician.
That's right.
With the support of the sitting congressman behind him.
Yeah.
Which, it's an extraordinary achievement.
Well, thank you.
Well, we joked when you won that, surely they must have thought going door to door you were doing it for your dad.
That's about right. But the gray hair kind of helped. That was the only thing that made people think that I was a little older. I was at an event once, and a lady said, they're saying these really awful things about you. They're saying, you're 28 years old. And she goes through a list of things, and I had to hold my tongue because she was convinced that I was, much older than I was.
Well, and in addition to your committee assignments and the issues we'll get to in a minute, our audience ought to know, the critical role you play as a deputy whip. And you arrived at that spot a lot earlier than most people do. The whip team is the team that puts together the votes and really the basic floor strategy, if you will, for the Republicans. And, I can say as a participant in that process, your contribution's been exceptional. I mean, it's not just on the floor where people can see, frankly, how articulate and passionate you are, but you're a pretty shrewd political thinker behind the scenes. So, well done.
Well, thank you. Well, it's an honor to be at that small table with deputy whips such as yourself and a few others in the Republican conference. And the whole idea is to actually find a basis for how we'd govern if Republicans are in the majority. And I think we've done a good task of that over the last year, building that rallying cry.
I think so. Actually, probably better than most people suspect. But let's talk about some of the reasons why. I'd like to get your view of the spending proposals and the fiscal priorities of this administration and where they're taking us.
Well, let's just look over the last decade. Spending has been out of control in Washington. Under Republicans, under Democrats, we all bear some responsibility. But the fact is that, the Bush budgets of 05 and 06, the last Bush budgets with with Republicans in control of Congress, government grew, discretionary spending grew at less than the rate of inflation. Well, that's the first time it'd been done since that Republican class of 95 insisted on real spending reforms, which brought us a balanced budget. So we actually had government growing at 2 to 3% in 05 and 06. Now government's growing at double digits. If you look at the bailout, the stimulus, go down the list of their spending proposals, and it makes Republican spending look like tinker toys, like child's play. And they've spent so much money that I think we're having, over the long term, we've got major concerns for our debt and our deficit. And if you see countries around the world like Greece, debts and deficits do affect people. It affects the interest rates. It affects their ability to borrow money, if you're competing as a small business person for lending versus the federal government needing extraordinary lending in order to prop up its free spending ways, then it's very destabilizing. And then it goes to unemployment as well. With massive government spending, with interest rates that are necessarily going to go up, when you see these things happening, it does affect people on an average everyday level and small businesses across this country, whether Oklahoma or North Carolina or wherever. And so what we need to do is control spending. I know you're on the Appropriations Committee. I know you work very hard to constrain that spending and make sure that...
I vote no a lot.
which is a good vote.
We need more people there voting no.
Yeah. And on appropriations, there are a few things government is supposed to do. It's supposed to do efficiently and well, and that's why we need people like you on the Appropriations Committee that are going to look line by line, which is what the President said he would do. But to truly do it here on Capitol Hill, look line by line and say, is this what the federal government should be doing? What should, and if we're going to do it, are they doing it correctly and right, and getting the most bang for the buck?
Let me get your assessment on obviously the biggest single spending package that we've ever seen, which was the stimulus bill, $787 billion. Sold to us really with the idea, not to us, because frankly not a single Republican voted for it, and a number of Democrats also voted with us, bipartisan opposition, but it was sold on the idea it would hold unemployment to 8%, something that clearly hasn't happened. So what's your assessment of that particular bill and its consequences?
Well, the so-called stimulus has been an absolute failure. There's no getting around it. We just celebrated the anniversary of the stimulus just 2 weeks ago. It's clear the stimulus failed. The whole idea was it was supposed to help average everyday Americans. The President said just a couple weeks ago that he cut taxes for every American. Well, I don't know about your folks in Oklahoma or the folks watching, but frankly, I think it's all news to every American that they got a tax cut.
I saw a poll that on that very point, and only 6% of the American people believe they got a tax cut. So if it was a tax cut, clearly people didn't feel it, didn't see it, and it didn't make any difference to them.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a question of whether you and I or all of us in elective office or across the country thought we should have a stimulus. I think we all agreed we should do something to alleviate high unemployment. Well, unfortunately, unemployment has climbed and climbed and climbed, and it's over 10% nationally.
What is it, by the way, in North Carolina?
11, just over 11,
wow.
And in my district, it's right around 15 for the 10 counties I represent. So people are truly hurting. The issue is, how do we confront this? Well, first of all, businesses are not making investments because they see this great uncertainty out of Washington policy. Whether it's this national energy tax, which would have a massively negative impact on Oklahoma, would have an impact on my constituents because it would drive up the cost of energy when people flip on the switch. The other thing it would do is it would help foreign countries take our jobs, whether it's manufacturing or any type of energy, any type of industry that needs energy. The price would go up for us. And so you'd see further movement of jobs offshore. So first thing we can do is stop Washington from doing what they're doing. Second, we need to make the tax cuts permanent. We're looking at this massive cliff at the end of the year of the 01 and 03 tax cuts, which we supported, to make sure that they're made permanent. When people see taxes going up, energy policy that is going to drive up the cost of us flipping on the light switch, when you see health care, all this great uncertainty for health care, people are holding back on making investments. We need to make sure that we get capital off the sidelines and into action. We need to make sure we get banks lending and that money into action for the economy so we can grow jobs. Those are the types of things we should be doing, not expanding government, not expanding health care, expanding government's role in health care. Mm-hmm. We should expand health care opportunities for people, but not at the price of people's ability to make individual decisions. So all these things really impact jobs across our country. And the stimulus is contributed in unemployment going up, not bringing it down. And this whole idea that the administration has saved or created jobs is fantasy. I haven't seen it in my region. I know folks in Oklahoma are hurting just like everyone else.
We've actually been luckier than most. We've got a
Yeah.
6.5% unemployment rate, but we can't stay a little island of relative prosperity compared to the rest of the country. So it's pretty devastating what's going on. Let me ask you this, because you also, in your role in the Budget Committee, I think that's one of the toughest, most thankless committees to serve on. Because really, if you do your job right, you've really got to say no to a lot of people when you're trying to craft a budget, and you really have to think long term. Most of the rest of us are operating within a calendar of what are we going to get done this year. Done well, the budget really isn't about just this year, but what the trends are. And you're going to be playing a very big role in March. I mean, March is always in Congress the year of the month of the budget, and I suspect we're going to have quite a clash with Congressman Ryan and your forces, and obviously our friends on the other side of the aisle. So give us a little preview of where you think the flashpoints will be in the budget debate, and then insofar as you want to, tell us what you think long-term we ought to be doing to get the budget back in balance over time.
Well, the President just submitted his budget, and he submitted a budget which is a 10-year document. It's a longer horizon. And what the President does is bring down the deficit from the 1.4 trillion he had last year, roughly just a little higher this year, and brings it down the following year, the third year of his administration, down to about 1.4 trillion, the same as his first year. So we'll see in the first 3 years of this President a higher deficit than Bush had in 8 years. It just shows you the magnitude of spending. Beyond that, economists say that with a growing and vibrant economy, a nation such as ours could afford a 3% of gross domestic product deficit, which translates into roughly $500 billion. In essence, it's like a family going to the bank. And they say, based on your income and based on your debt load, you can get lending up to this percentage. Likewise, a government functions in a similar way. The President's budget document over 10 years, the best deficit that he has, meaning the lowest deficit he has, is 4.5% of our gross domestic product, which is comparable to what is happening in Greece right now, with the run on their money, destabilizing effect of their deficits and massive debt. So in the 10th year, the President's budget is still well beyond what economists say is reasonable. So what the President said is, rather than making the difficult decisions necessary, I'm going to appoint a commission. And I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until after the election and see what they come up with. Well, by the structure of this commission, one thing necessarily comes back. Based on their appointments they've made to the commission, it necessarily comes back with much, much higher taxes. So this budget debate is interesting because the plan that the President submits, his own economists say is destabilizing to the marketplace, meaning it's going to drive interest rates, unemployment will go up under these painful circumstances with government spending much more than it takes in. So the backdrop of the whole budget debate is this commission. The commission is structured so that the intent is to come back with spending cuts and tax increases. Well, one thing always remains throughout the history of our country when you have a commission like this. They come back with massive tax increases and proposed spending cuts. The spending cuts never happen. Remember the Bush the senior in 1990.
Absolutely.
The spending cuts never happen, but the tax increases are permanent. So that's the danger in this situation. With
And I ought to point out for our audience, and you might want to, you have your own legislation in this area that would propose the type of commission that I think in my district would be much more popular with the people I represent. You might want to elaborate on that.
Yes, it's my bill is called the Core Spending Act.
Which I want to add I'm a proud co-sponsor of.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But the idea is you have a commission, and you say, fine, look at the spending, whether our entitlement programs or discretionary spending, look at the totality of what the federal government spends. Come back with reasonable reforms to make sure that we're accountable with the taxpayer's dollar. But you're not allowed to come back with tax increases or new taxes. I think a likely scenario out of this commission the President's proposed is a new form of a national tax, whether a value-added tax like they have in Europe or some type of national sales tax on top of the problems we have with IRS and the jumbled tax code we currently have. So my commission says you can't raise taxes. You have to look at the spending side and reform this on the spending side. Because I think your constituents and my constituents agree, we don't have a problem with revenue. We have a problem with spending. And the real issue that we have to address in Washington is entitlement reform and making sure we're getting the best bang for our buck and the government's doing only what it should be doing. That's going to be the large debate we have on the budget.
What you're proposing is much more in line with the base closing commission. Of course, in my district, people really are familiar with. It was just a matter of how many tough cuts can you take. There was never an adjustment on the upside. So I think actually forcing the Congress to make tough decisions about spending is what you ought to do. When they finally get to the point they say literally, we'd rather raise taxes than cut spending, then you probably have cut as far as you can go, because nobody wants to do that, at least certainly not on our side of the aisle.
No, and I think the responsible thing when people are hurting nationally, and you have an unemployment challenge, is to not raise people's taxes, not take more from them, but to be more efficient with their dollars and be more effective with it. I mean, there's certain basic government programs that the federal government should be doing, and should be doing very effectively and efficiently.
Well, in addition, of course, to sitting on the Budget Committee, where you really do have to grapple with these longer, you actually sit on one of the committees that does a little bit of that, government oversight and reform. And if you were picking the areas from your perspective in that committee, the knowledge base you have, that we really ought to be looking at in terms of reduction of spending, what are some of the specifics that you think, okay, here's a place, how we're popular, is still something we ought to look at reining in?
Well, you can look at basically everything that was included in the stimulus bill, the new government programs.
And how much money has still not been spent in that stimulus bill?
Well, you basically have two-thirds of the revenue, the spending, just shy of $500 billion that has not yet been spent in the stimulus. So you see that the intent was really not to stimulate the economy, it was to grow government. Whether it's a welfare reform of the mid-'90s that was unwound within the stimulus bill. That's one example where we've basically increased welfare in this country with no commensurate demand for labor related to it, meaning working in order to get benefits. And so that's one area, welfare reform. Another area, obviously, over the long term, is making sure that we have Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are solvent, not just for the current generation of recipients, but for the next generation. And so we need to look at reforms there so it can be effective. One thing in particular is what is happening here in Washington with the increase of federal employees. The U.S. Department of Education, as an example, has over 4,000 employees. The average salary for those 4,000 employees is just shy of $100,000 a year. Now, that is one area where you can ask a teacher in a classroom or a superintendent in Oklahoma or North Carolina and say, do they help you? Do they educate a child? Is this assistance from Washington truly assistance? I think they'll tell you no. So we can look at the billions of dollars we spend on bureaucrats sitting behind a desk and get that money to a classroom. That's effectiveness of money. There's no doubt that education requires money. I mean, as somebody who's been involved in higher education, you know the ins and outs of that. But the effectiveness of that money, when you have a government bureaucrat sitting behind a desk making more than twice as much as the average teacher in America, something's wrong. And so we need to make sure we get that money in the classroom. And the U.S. Department of Education is one area where you can get much better efficiency for the dollars in the classroom with the student, rather than some nameless, faceless bureaucrat sitting in an office in Washington, D.C., only pushing paperwork down to that teacher in the classroom.
What about, we're also in the midst, and you've played a big role in this, of a major health care debate. And we've just had a rather dramatic episode with the president meeting with the leaders of both parties. It's not clear, well, it is clear they didn't find much common ground. So we're headed into probably another several weeks worth of debate over this issue. How do you think it's going to play out?
Interesting. This has been a fascinating debate. I think what the president was trying to say in the summit is that we're really close, which is not factually correct. I mean, it's just far from true. The fact is that the conservative approach versus the liberal approach are so dramatically different. It's north versus south, east versus west. And the idea that we can compromise by only going a few dozen miles south when I want to go north is just illogical. So the president saying that we're very close is just not true. The fact is that a conservative approach puts more control in individuals' hands to make decisions for themselves and their family. The liberal approach says that the government is going to do that, and we need to have a single-payer system. So the individual on one side, the government on the other, where do we meet? Well, the president's just saying, well, we'll just have a larger government role. I mean, it's so, we can't just cave on this stuff. I think as conservatives we have a very valid perspective and come from a genuine point of view.
No, and obviously we have a lot of Democrats see it the same way. I mean, that's the interesting thing to me about this. We all know in the chamber and if all the Democrats were unified on this wouldn't be much of a fight. And so the fact is the president, the speaker haven't been able to get their own team together, so to speak, behind a single comprehensive plan. And as I told somebody, a reporter asked me, well, why won't you Republicans be helpful? And I said, well, gosh, I could probably vote for a plan that Dan Bourne from my state votes for. If he'll vote for it, I might even be able to vote for it. But there are lots of conservative Democrats. Why would conservative Republicans vote for a plan that conservative Democrats won't embrace?
Well, and the other thing it's fascinating is the president says he has a problem with the Republicans. It's not true. He's got a problem with those in his own party. The Democrats control the House and the Senate by wide margins. I think most Americans now know that Democrats had 60 votes in the Senate.
For a year. Almost
for a year. And now they have 59. So they went from the largest majority in a generation to the second largest majority in a generation. And in fact, for us to go back to a comparable moment for Republicans, we have to approach 80 years in our history to find this wide majority for Republicans. So they have 60% in the House. They've got 59% of the U.S. Senate, and yet the problem is with Republicans. That's not true. It just shows that there are issues within their own party. And I think truly we could have a bipartisan compromise, and it would be dealing with pre-existing conditions and those with chronic diseases and illnesses, being able to give them a baseline of coverage. We can do that by simply passing medical malpractice reform. That would fund that effort. Now, is it going to be this $1 trillion bill the president wants? Is it going to be close to $1 trillion of new taxes? Is it going to be a massive expansion of Medicare or Medicaid? No, it's not. Is it going to be the so-called public option or a single-payer plan? No. But will it help thousands upon thousands, millions of Americans get access to health care? Absolutely. And moreover, as individuals that have health insurance, our premiums would go down because of medical malpractice reform. Those two things alone would help out tens of millions of people. And I think that's where we need to begin this whole process.
I'm going to drag you to an area, and we've not got a lot of time left, but you're also one of our leading members on financial services. And we all know we had a financial crisis in September of 2008. It's had dramatic impact on the economy. We're still suffering with that. There's a lot of discussion about financial regulatory reform. What do you see on the horizon?
Well, I mean, clearly we have to update our financial regulatory rules. The last time we rewrote these rules to a certain degree, just shy of 15 years ago. And so we need to make sure we update them with a modern era. That means transparency and disclosure. The two biggest culprits of this economic downfall were derivatives and so-called credit default swaps. Two items that were not disclosed to investors or us and the average everyday marketplace of investing or buying stocks. So as a result, we didn't know the quality of the investment we're making, meaning we couldn't see in the black box of the company what they owed and are they in a healthy situation or not a healthy situation. So what we could do is have a small regulatory reform piece that makes people open up their books to show what they owe, basically, the contracts that they're trading. Mm-hmm. So transparency and disclosure, and that would not be a government mandate for a company to do X, Y, or Z. All it would say is just show investors what you're doing. That would enable us as individuals to make better decisions. That's the type of reform we need. However, I'm not the chairman of the committee. Barney Frank is the chairman of the committee, a well-known liberal from Massachusetts who has a very different perspective. He wants to increase government. He wants to have a new regulator to determine whether or not certain products are suitable for the individuals receiving them. Meaning the government's going to tell you if this checking account is best for you. Well, I think we're smart enough to make these decisions for ourselves. So rather than this big state, big government role on financial service issues, I think individuals need to be making those decisions. That's the dividing point right now. I think they're going to try to ram something through, but they're so held up on health care that they can't quite get to the financial regulatory reform. So there is some benefit on this, on the fact that they keep slapping their jaws on health care and spinning their wheels. So I think that is a helpful move for us.
Well, Congressman, we're just about out of time, but I think our listeners and viewers will understand why I feel so good about the future of the Republican Party when they listen to you. You got the energy, you've got the intelligence, you got the drive to get things done, Patrick. You're going to have a brilliant career here. And so, again, thanks so much for coming and participating, and I look forward to watching what I truly do believe will be a remarkable career unfold in the years ahead.
Thank you. Tom, thank you for your leadership. Your constituents are lucky to have you in Congress, and it's an honor to work with you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.